Welcome back to Into the Podcast, everyone. Tonight, we're plunging into a story that really embodies that primal fear of the unknown right within the comfort or discomfort of your own home. We're talking about a quiet dwelling, a long-term resident, and a sudden, terrifying physical encounter. I'm Peter Kennedy, and I'm thrilled to be joined by an incredible panel of experts to help us unpack this. First up, we have Martin, a distinguished professor of folklore and mythology. Martin, great to have you.
Thanks, Peter. Always a pleasure to dive into the stories that shape our understanding of the world, seen and unseen.
Next, we have Dr. Anastasia, a brilliant researcher in parapsychology and anomalous experiences from the Department of Psychology. Dr. Anastasia, welcome.
Thank you, Peter. I'm eager to explore the psychological and environmental dimensions of this captivating report.
And finally, joining us is Tom, an acclaimed occult specialist and historian, author of The Hidden Corners of the Everyday. Tom, always a treat to have your unique perspective.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Some corners are hidden for a reason, and tonight's story might just open one up.
Indeed. Tonight's episode, The Tiny Cabin Grip, revolves around an account submitted by a listener, a 45-year-old electrician who, for 7 years, lived alone in a very small cabin-like house. This house had a history. An elderly woman had passed away in the kitchen, presumed of natural causes, before he moved in. For years, he felt her presence, a persistent, non-threatening feeling. He never spoke about it, until one night. He was in bed, reading with the lights on, when the sensation of her presence grew more intense. Then, suddenly, he felt a firm grip on his wrist. He describes it as a real physical hold, not just a tingle. He jumped out of bed, screamed, and was overwhelmed by extreme terror. For a week, he slept with the lights on. He eventually confided in his best friend, then his wife. He moved out, but he insists the event remains vividly unsettling and 100% true. He's an electrician and had no prior writing experience, relaying his story in a straightforward, earnest tone. So, let's start with first impressions. Martin, when you hear a story like this, what immediately jumps out at you?
Well, Peter, the persistent, non-threatening feeling part really resonates with a lot of folklore about guardian spirits, or what we sometimes call household spirits. They're often benevolent, attached to a place, and their presence is just part of the fabric of the home. The elderly woman dying in the kitchen also gives it a very domestic, personal feel, which often grounds these kinds of stories in a relatable reality.
From a psychological standpoint, the escalation is very interesting. The transition from a feeling of presence to a physical grip is a significant shift. My mind immediately goes to the brain's interpretation of sensory input, especially in states of heightened awareness or even during sleep cycles, given it happened at night. The extreme terror response is also a crucial detail, as it points to a very real, visceral experience regardless of its ultimate origin.
I'm struck by the fact that he's an electrician, and that this happened in a small, cabin-like space. In occult traditions, certain professions are believed to interact differently with energetic currents, and confined spaces often act as conduits or focal points for things to manifest. A grip, specifically on the wrist, also carries a lot of symbolic weight. It's about connection, control, sometimes a warning or even a binding. It's not a tap on the shoulder, it's a hold.
Fascinating initial thoughts, all very different angles. Martin, let's dig deeper into the folklore. You mentioned guardian spirits. In many cultures, are there spirits of the dead known to assist rather than threaten homeowners, particularly those who have lived and died in a place?
Absolutely. Think of the brownies in British folklore, or the hobs, small, often hairy creatures who, if treated well, would help with chores around the house. They're not necessarily spirits of the dead, but they represent a benevolent, protective presence tied to a specific dwelling. More directly, many cultures have ancestor veneration, where the spirits of deceased family members are believed to watch over the home and family. In some Indian traditions, for example, a Maitri is a friendly household spirit. The key here is the non-threatening aspect. It suggests a residual energy or even a protective entity rather than something malevolent. It's often linked to someone who died peacefully, as our caller implied.
And the physical touch, the grip specifically, does that have any precedence in folklore?
Indeed, while not always a grip, tales of physical contact from spirits are common. We have stories of cold hands phenomena or the feeling of being brushed against. Sometimes it's a warning, sometimes an attempt to communicate. In specific folklore, there are hand of the dead stories, often linked to a belief that the deceased might reach out, sometimes to pull you into their realm, but just as often to impart a message or even offer a final comfort. The wrist, as Tom noted, is also a significant point, often linked to life force or connection. The fact that it was firm suggests an intentionality, whether from the entity or the experiencer's perception.
Does the size of the dwelling, this tiny cabin, affect the type of spirit folklore associated with it?
It can. Large, grand houses often accumulate stories of grand, dramatic hauntings, perhaps a spectral lady in white or a ghostly figure in armor. But smaller, more intimate spaces like cottages or cabins tend to foster folklore about more personal, domestic entities. These are spirits that are intertwined with the everyday fabric of life. A grandmother in the kitchen, a farmer by the hearth. It makes the presence feel more contained, more personal, and perhaps in a strange way more potent because there's less space for it to dissipate.
And specifically, an elderly woman dying in a kitchen. Any regional myths that come to mind?
The kitchen, culturally, is the heart of the home. It's where sustenance is prepared, where families gather, where warmth and life are often centered. An elderly woman dying there, especially presumed natural causes, reinforces this idea of a natural transition within a sacred domestic space. There aren't specific widespread myths about kitchen deaths leading to hauntings in the same way battlefields might, but it certainly strengthens the narrative of a benevolent residual presence, a guardian of the hearth, if you will. It's a very human, very grounded image, which often forms the bedrock of these types of localized folk beliefs.
That makes a lot of sense, Martin. Dr. Anastasia, let's pivot to the scientific and psychological lens. When someone reports a real physical grip, like our caller did, what's the current consensus on tactile hallucinations, either during sleep or wakefulness?
Tactile hallucinations are a fascinating area. They can occur in various states. During sleep paralysis, which happens when your mind wakes up but your body is still asleep, people often report a strong sense of presence, pressure on their chest, or even being touched or held down. The brain misinterprets internal bodily sensations or external stimuli in the environment. However, our caller was reading in bed with the lights on, implying he was fully awake. In wakefulness, tactile hallucinations can sometimes be linked to neurological conditions, extreme stress, or even certain medications, but for a healthy individual, they are less common to be so distinct and localized.
He's an electrician. Could his exposure to electromagnetic fields potentially influence his perception or even trigger such a sensation?
That's a very salient point. There's a hypothesis, the electromagnetic field hypothesis, which suggests that fluctuations in EMFs can induce anomalous experiences, including feelings of presence, dizziness, or even mild tactile sensations in susceptible individuals. Electricians by trade are regularly exposed to varying levels of EMF. While a direct grip is quite specific, cumulative exposure or sudden localized spikes in EMF could potentially sensitize someone to perceive subtle shifts in their environment as something more tangible. It's about how the brain interprets signals. The brain is always trying to make sense of what's happening, and in a low-level, high-stress or unfamiliar environment, it can sometimes fill in the blanks in unexpected ways, manifesting as a tactile hallucination.
Are there other psychological triggers, like isolation or fatigue, that could produce such a strong, sudden sensation of being grabbed?
Absolutely. Isolation, especially for someone living alone for 7 years in a small space, can heighten sensory perception and lead to what we call hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations, those vivid experiences at the cusp of sleep or waking. Prolonged solitude can also create a psychological environment where the brain is more prone to projecting its internal states onto the external world. Fatigue and stress are also huge factors. The mind becomes less capable of critical assessment when exhausted, making it more vulnerable to misinterpreting stimuli or generating vivid internal experiences. The claustrophobic nature of a tiny cabin can also amplify anxiety, making one more jumpy or sensitive to perceived threats, even if they're internally generated.
If a listener were to experience something similar and wanted to investigate objectively, what research methods would you recommend?
First, detailed journaling. Documenting everything: time, date, specific sensations, emotional state, what they were doing before, any sleep disturbances, and even environmental factors like temperature or strange sounds. Second, a thorough environmental assessment, checking for CO2 leaks, mold, infrasound, and importantly, EMF fluctuations using a meter. Third, if possible, recording the environment with audio and video, especially during the times these events tend to occur. And finally, consider seeing a medical professional to rule out any underlying physiological conditions that might mimic these experiences. It's about methodically eliminating conventional explanations before jumping to paranormal conclusions.
Excellent practical advice. Tom, let's turn to the occult. In occult practice, what does a firm grip on the wrist symbolize?
A grip, especially on the wrist, is incredibly significant. The wrist is a pulse point, a conduit for vital energy, life force. In many magical traditions, a grip can symbolize a few things: a binding, literally holding someone or an entity to a place or a purpose. It could also be an attempt at communication, a non-verbal message that bypasses the mind and goes straight to the visceral. Sometimes it's a warning, a physical stop signal. Given the context, this grip feels less like an attack and more like an intense communication or an attempt to make a profound, undeniable connection. The terror was the recipient's reaction, not necessarily the spirit's intent.
That's a powerful distinction. Are there rituals or protective measures in occult practice that address non-malevolent hauntings, like what this electrician initially experienced?
Absolutely. Not all spirits are malevolent. Some are just lost, attached, or residual. For non-malevolent presences, the approach isn't expulsion, but rather guidance or acknowledgement. You might use offerings, not to appease an angry spirit, but to honor a benevolent one. Simple rituals of blessing the home, setting boundaries, or even communicating verbally, asking the spirit to move on if it chooses, or to simply reside peacefully without disturbance can be effective. The key is intent and respect. It's about setting harmonious coexistence or helping the spirit find its way, rather than banishing it forcefully, which can sometimes just agitate a non-threatening entity.
And the death occurring in the kitchen, does that hold any particular symbolic weight in occult interpretations?
Just as Martin said, the kitchen is the heart. In occultism, places where life events happen, births, deaths, significant emotional moments, can leave a psychic imprint or even bind a soul. The kitchen, being a place of nourishment and family, would likely hold a strong energetic resonance. A death there could create a knot in the energetic fabric of the home, especially if it was a peaceful, natural passing. This isn't necessarily negative, it's just a focal point where energy might congeal or linger, making the presence of the departed more palpable, like an energetic anchor.
Lastly, could the electrician's profession have inadvertently opened a channel for an entity, especially with the EMF angle Dr. Anastasia mentioned?
It's a very old idea that certain individuals, often those who work with raw elements or energies, can be more sensitive or even act as conduits. An electrician constantly working with the flow of electricity could unknowingly attune themselves to other, subtler energy flows. In occultism, electricity has long been seen as a powerful, vital force, akin to life force itself. There are traditions of electric talismans or using electrical currents in certain rituals. So it's not a stretch to consider that his constant interaction with electrical fields might have made him more receptive or perhaps even generated a unique energetic signature around him or his home that made this kind of intense interaction possible. It's like being an antenna that can suddenly pick up a frequency no one else can.
Wow, so many fascinating connections across your disciplines. Let's try to pull some of these threads together. What are the points where your frameworks might overlap or where they distinctly diverge, particularly regarding that physical grip?
I think the overlap is in the interpretation of intent. Whether it's a folkloric guardian spirit, an energetic binding, or a misinterpretation of stimuli, the physical contact suggests a powerful attempt at communication or assertion. My view is that culturally, we're primed to interpret such an event as supernatural because it fits established narratives.
I agree with Martin on the intensity of the experience. From my perspective, the brain's construction of reality can be incredibly vivid. The brain is always seeking patterns, and in a charged emotional state, under conditions of isolation and potentially influenced by EMFs, that pattern seeking can create a compelling, undeniable physical sensation. The mind might create the grip even if no external physical force was present, simply because it's trying to make sense of the overwhelming feeling of presence. However, I can't rule out that some form of unquantifiable energy might be at play, but we need more research.
I think where we all converge is that the event was undeniably real for the experiencer. For me, the divergence is that while psychology explains the mechanism of perception and folklore categorizes it, occultism provides a framework for the what. What kind of entity, what kind of communication, what kind of binding? It suggests a deliberate act, even if the intent was misunderstood by the recipient. The fact it was a grip and not a tap implies a desire for certainty, for undeniable contact. So whether it's an imprint, a misfire, or a message, the common ground is the profound impact on the individual. We've got a few listener questions that came in. Here's one. What about poltergeists? Could this be a poltergeist activity given the sudden escalation? Martin.
Poltergeists usually involve more overt disruptive physical phenomena. Things flying, noises, constant commotion. This account, with its singular focused grip, feels more like a direct, perhaps residual interaction rather than the chaotic energy associated with the poltergeist.
Another question. How much does belief play a role? If the electrician didn't believe in ghosts, would this still have happened? Dr. Anastasia.
Belief certainly can prime us to interpret experiences in a certain way. If you were a staunch skeptic, he might have rationalized it as a cramp or a dream. However, intense, sudden sensations can transcend belief. If it was a truly potent stimulus, whether external or internal, even a non-believer would experience the physiological shock and terror. Belief might shape the narrative he builds around it afterwards, but the initial raw experience can be quite universal.
Tom, this one's for you. If it was a benevolent spirit, why the terror? Was the spirit misunderstood, or was it a warning?
I think it was very much misunderstood. Most people's gut reaction to unexpected contact from the unseen is terror, regardless of the spirit's intent. The sheer breach of the veil is enough. The spirit might have been trying to communicate, or even, as I said, bind him to the place for protection. The grip, for an entity, might be the only way it knows to get through, to make itself undeniable. It probably didn't intend to terrify him, but rather to make an impression.
All right, as we wrap up, for our listeners who might be experiencing similar unexplained phenomena, what are some practical takeaways or pieces of advice you can offer?
I'd say, first, understand the cultural context. Are there local stories about your area? Knowing the folklore can sometimes demystify or even normalize an experience. If it feels non-threatening, acknowledge it, but don't obsess. Sometimes a simple acknowledgement is all a residual presence needs.
My advice is always to rule out the mundane first. Check your environment thoroughly. Carbon monoxide detectors, electrical wiring, sleep hygiene. Keep a detailed log of events. And don't hesitate to seek professional help if the experiences cause significant distress. Whether it's psychological or truly anomalous, support is available.
For those inclined towards a more active approach, learn about protective measures like banishing rituals or creating energetic boundaries around your space. Even simple visualization can be powerful. And if you feel a connection, try to communicate, respectfully but clearly. Ask for peace, or for the presence to make its intentions clear in a less startling way. Intent is everything.
Incredible insights from all of you tonight. Martin, Dr. Anastasia, Tom, thank you so much for shedding light on such a chilling and thought-provoking account.
My pleasure, Peter.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you, our listeners, for tuning into the podcast. Remember, sometimes the walls we build around ourselves, whether physical cabins or the routines of daily work, become the very place where the unseen reaches out. Tonight we've explored whether that grip was a warning, a memory, or something altogether different. On Mondishagrokuni Kabim. If you have your own stories of the unexplained, we want to hear them. Visit our website to submit your experience, and you might just hear it discussed on a future episode. Join us next time when we dive into another cryptic corner of reality. Until then, keep questioning and maybe, just maybe, keep a nightlight on. Good night.